Something is happening in Germany right now that will fundamentally alter the future of millions of people, and almost nobody's talking about it. By July 2026, a shift is coming that will touch the lives of pensioners, future retirees, and everyone currently paying into the system. But here's what makes this so peculiar. The change isn't dramatic on the surface. It's quiet. It's technical. It hides behind numbers and policy language. Yet when you understand what's really happening, you realize this is one of the most significant pension developments in recent memory. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you've worked your entire life, 40, 50, maybe even 60 years of contributions. You've built up what you thought was a secure retirement, following the rules, believing in a system that promised to take care of you in your golden years. Then one day, you get a letter. The numbers look different than you expected. Not catastrophically different, but different enough to matter. Different enough to make you wonder what changed. And when you try to understand why, you discover that back in July 2026, something shifted. Something called the Rentenpunkt value changed from what it was to something new. And that number? 0.42 euros. That single value, that seemingly insignificant decimal, represents a massive transformation in how retirement actually works in Germany. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so a number changed. Why should I care? And that's exactly the question we're going to answer today, because the real story here isn't about a single number at all. It's about what that number means for your future, your security, and the entire German pension system. Think about that for a moment. The Rentenpunkt, the pension point, is the foundation of everything. It's the mathematical unit that determines how much you actually receive in retirement. Every year you work, you accumulate pension points. The government assigns a monetary value to those points annually. That value multiplies your total points to give you your monthly pension. It sounds simple, but it's absolutely crucial. And what we're about to witness is the first major recalibration of this system in years. Here's where things get interesting. The current value of a pension point is about 0.39 euros. When July 2026 arrives, that value is projected to jump to 0.42 euros. Now, at first glance, that seems positive, right? The value is going up, pensions are increasing. But the real question, the one that keeps economists and policy experts awake at night, is whether this increase is actually enough. Whether it keeps up with reality. Whether it represents genuine security or just an illusion of progress while real purchasing power slowly erodes. To understand this properly, we need to rewind and see how we got here. Germany's pension system wasn't built overnight. It evolved over more than a century, shaped by economic booms, wars, recessions, and demographic catastrophes. After World War II, when Germany was literally divided in two, the pension system had to be rebuilt from scratch. West Germany created what would become the Bismarck model, a pay-as-you-go system where current workers fund current retirees. It was revolutionary. It was supposed to be unshakable, and for decades it worked beautifully. But then something changed. The workforce started shrinking. People started living longer. Birth rates dropped. Suddenly, the mathematics that had worked so elegantly became terrifyingly fragile. Where there used to be 8 workers supporting 1 retiree, now there are barely 4. By 2050, the projections suggest it could be closer to 2. 2 workers supporting 1 person in retirement. Think about that. The entire financial foundation that pension promises were built on is shifting beneath everyone's feet. This is where the Rentenpunkt value becomes absolutely critical. It's not just a number, it's a political choice. Every year, when the government announces the new value, they're essentially choosing between several impossible options. Do you increase the value dramatically, which means today's workers have to pay more in contributions? Do you keep it modest, which means today's retirees watch their purchasing power slowly decline? Or do you raise the retirement age, which nobody wants to hear about? Someone always loses in this equation. Someone always pays the price. And honestly, most people don't realize this is the conversation happening right now in German government offices and pension institutes. They're wrestling with these exact questions, trying to find a solution that doesn't destroy anyone's retirement or bankrupt the next generation. The 0.42 euros projection for 2026 is their current best answer. But it's not a perfect answer. It's a compromise wearing the mask of normalcy. Let's dig into what this actually means for real people. Imagine you're a German worker. Let's say you're 45 years old. You've accumulated maybe 30 points so far, assuming you've had a reasonably normal career. When you retire in 20 years, you'll hopefully have 50 or 60 points total, depending on how long you work. With the current value of 0.39 euros, each point is worth that amount monthly. When the new value kicks in at 0.42 euros, each point becomes worth slightly more. So your hypothetical 50 points would generate a monthly pension of 21 euros, more than it would have under the old system. 21 euros. That's about the cost of a nice dinner for one person, or 2 coffees and a pastry, or a small book. Now, is 21 euros nothing? Absolutely not. In retirement, when you're on a fixed income, every euro matters. But here's where the complication arises. That modest increase masks a much larger story about what's really happening to pension sustainability. The government is trying to gradually adjust the system upward, but only slightly, because any dramatic increase would create enormous political backlash from working-age people who already feel squeezed. But that's not all. The timing of this change is important. July 2026 isn't random. It's when several policies are scheduled to intersect. The government's commitment to keep pension contribution rates below a certain threshold ends around that time. Various stimulus programs and support mechanisms that have been propping up the system are set to expire. It's like watching a juggler preparing to drop one ball while catching 3 others. The 0.42 euros is part of that complex choreography. Now wait a second. There's another layer to this that rarely gets discussed. The Rentenpunkt value doesn't just affect current retirees getting their monthly checks. It also determines the value of the pension points that younger people are accumulating right now. Every year a 30-year-old works and contributes to the system, they're earning points that will eventually be worth something when they retire. If the point value doesn't increase substantially over time, all those future retirees will face a difficult reality. They'll have points worth less than they expected when they actually cash them in. This creates a fascinating intergenerational tension. The system requires that future workers keep contributing at high rates to fund current retirees. But as those future workers become actual retirees, they discover their points don't buy what they thought they would. It's a pyramid structure, and pyramids eventually run out of base. Let that sink in. The German government is essentially asking young people today to fund generous pensions for people retiring now, while simultaneously managing expectations about what their own retirement will look like. It's a delicate balance, and the 0.42 euros projection represents one attempt to thread that needle. Here's something surprising that most financial commentators miss. The Rentenpunkt value doesn't exist in isolation. It's intimately connected to something called the contribution rate. This is what workers and employers actually pay into the system. Currently, it sits at around 18.6% of income. That's shared between employee and employer. The government has committed to not letting it rise above 25% until 2035, but mathematically, based on demographic trends, many experts believe it needs to go higher. So what do you do when you can't raise the rate enough? You slightly increase the point value instead, giving retirees modest increases while hoping productivity growth and economic expansion will eventually save the system. The projection for 2026 reflects this reality perfectly. It's not a solution, it's a managed adjustment. A way of saying, we're going to give you a small increase now, but understand that the underlying situation remains challenging. Now, here's where the emotional dimension of this story becomes important. Behind all these numbers and percentages are real human beings. People who dedicated their lives to work, who made sacrifices, who trusted in a system. An 80-year-old widow in Berlin isn't thinking about contribution rates or demographic projections. She's thinking about whether she can afford heating this winter, or whether she needs to choose between medication and groceries. For her, that extra 21 euros per month isn't policy minutia, it's actual survival. And then you have young people, people in their 20s and 30s, who are questioning whether the entire system will even exist when they retire. They see contribution rates rising, they see retirement ages creeping upward, and they wonder if they're spending their youth funding other people's retirements at the expense of their own futures. Their frustration is equally valid. They're being asked to sacrifice for a system they might not even benefit from. Both perspectives are true. Both matter. And the 0.42 euros is the government's attempt to acknowledge both concerns while satisfying neither completely. But then something unexpected happened. Right before this major recalibration was supposed to occur, the economic landscape started changing. Inflation hit in unexpected ways. Labor shortages emerged in certain sectors. Technology disruption accelerated. These weren't factors that the original projections accounted for when they calculated that 0.42 figure. Suddenly, the assumptions underlying the projection started looking questionable. Think about inflation for a moment. If prices rise at 5% per year, but your pension point value only increases by about 7% over several years, you're losing purchasing power in real terms. Inflation is stealing from your retirement in slow motion. The 80-year-old widow's heating bill goes up faster than her pension does. The math becomes increasingly painful. This is why some pension experts have been quietly pushing for reconsideration of the 2026 projection. They're arguing that the increases need to be more substantial. Others counter that any dramatic increase would require either massive contribution rate hikes or significant tax increases to cover the gap. Nobody wants to be the politician who announces either of those things. Here's the heart of the matter, and this is what makes the story so compelling. Germany is in a genuine policy crisis, and the 0.42 euros is just one symptom. The country faces a fundamental choice. It can maintain a generous defined benefit pension system where retirees receive a promised amount regardless of market conditions, but only if working-age people accept significantly higher contributions or higher taxes. Or it can maintain reasonable contribution rates, but only if it's willing to shift some risk onto retirees or means test benefits. There is no solution that makes everyone happy. This isn't pessimism. It's mathematical reality. With fewer workers and more retirees, something has to give. And that's what 2026 represents. It's not a solution. It's a decision about which group bears which burden. Some countries have already made this choice. France went through pension reform that sparked massive protests. The UK shifted significantly toward private pensions. The United States has been gradually raising the retirement age. These aren't failures. They're adaptations to demographic reality. Germany is slower to move, which some see as prudent caution and others see as dangerous procrastination. The July 2026 change, with that 0.42 euro value, will be watched closely not just in Germany but across Europe. It will send a signal about whether Germany is willing to make bolder changes or whether it's committed to the current path of gradual, modest adjustments. That signal matters because other countries are facing the same pressures and wondering how they'll handle it. Now, if you're an international viewer wondering why you should care about German pension policy, here's why. Germany is Europe's largest economy. What happens to German pensions sends ripples through European financial markets. Pension reforms in Germany influence policy discussions elsewhere. And if you're planning to retire in Europe or considering investments in European markets, the stability or instability of major pension systems affects your personal financial future. But more broadly, this is a universal story. Every developed country is aging. Every country with a pay-as-you-go system faces the same mathematical pressures. Germany is just first among many nations to grapple seriously with how to respond. The decisions made in 2026 could serve as a template, for better or worse, for what other nations do when they reach the same crisis point. Let me tell you something fascinating. There's a hidden optimism in all of this, and it rarely gets mentioned. The fact that Germany is discussing these changes now, several years in advance, is actually positive. Countries that wait until the last minute face catastrophic choices. Germany is uncomfortable, yes, but not in freefall. There's still time to make adjustments. There's still room to maneuver. The very fact that economists and policymakers are debating the point value and contribution rates means the system is responding to pressure, even if slowly. And honestly, the technical sophistication of the German system is impressive. The Rentenpunkt mechanism exists precisely so that the government can make these kinds of adjustments annually, dynamically responding to economic conditions. It's not perfect, but it's far better than systems that are locked in place and can't adapt. Germany built flexibility into its foundation decades ago, and that flexibility is what's allowing this semi-civilized discussion rather than a complete meltdown. But there's also a shadow side to all this adjustment. Every slight increase in contribution rates, every modest reduction in what points are worth, every extension of the working life by a few months, it all adds up. It's like water dripping on a stone. One drop doesn't hurt. 100 drops over years transforms the landscape. Young people looking at the pension system today see something different than what their parents saw. The unspoken promise that you work 45 years and then you retire with dignity at 65 is becoming a relic. The new reality is more complex, more precarious, more dependent on individual circumstances. This is why the 0.42 euros matters psychologically as much as mathematically. It represents the continued viability of the system, barely. It says, yes, pensions will still exist when you retire. Yes, the system will probably still be standing, but maybe not as generous as the stories your grandparents tell. Maybe not as secure as you'd hoped. It's the sound of a system under stress, trying to evolve before it breaks completely. The real turning point, the moment when everything either stabilizes or enters crisis, probably lies somewhere in the 2030s and 2040s. By then, the baby boomer generation will be fully retired. The ratio of workers to retirees will have hit historical lows. Demographic headwinds will be at maximum force. The decisions made between now and then, including this 2026 adjustment, will determine whether the system survives that period intact or whether it requires radical restructuring. Now, if you've been following along, you might be thinking, okay, so the system is under pressure, the adjustments are modest, and there's a crisis point coming. What's actually going to happen? What does this mean for my retirement? That's the impossible question to answer with certainty because it depends on so many variables. Political will, economic growth, immigration and labor force participation, life expectancy trends. All of these could shift in ways that either ease or exacerbate the pressures. But here's what we can say with reasonable confidence. The 0.42 euros projection represents the government's current best estimate of what's sustainable. It's not generous, but it's plausible. And if conditions change significantly, for better or worse, that number will be adjusted. For current retirees, the increase is welcome but modest. For workers in their 40s and 50s, it provides some assurance that the system will still be around when they retire. For people in their 20s, it feels like their government is asking them to fund a system that might not treat them as generously. All of these feelings are legitimate. The larger story here transcends this single policy change. It's about the collision between demographics and promises. It's about a generation that built social systems assuming the future would look like the past, and then the future showed up looking quite different. It's about institutions trying to adapt without breaking. And it's about millions of ordinary people trying to plan their lives while the rules slowly shift beneath them. Germany will probably muddle through. The system won't collapse, but it will continue to evolve, adjusting contribution rates and point values year by year, slowly recalibrating expectations. That's not a failure. It's how systems survive in a changing world. But it's also not the seamless, stable retirement promise that people dreamed of receiving. So here we are in 2026, standing at the threshold of this change. The Rentenpunkt value shifts from 0.39 to 0.42 euros. It sounds almost anticlimactic when you say it that way. Just a few cents, just an administrative update. But it represents something much bigger. A nation grappling with the fundamental question of how to keep a promise when the world has changed in ways that make that promise harder to keep. In the months leading up to July 2026, you'll probably see more discussions about pension reform. There might be debates about whether the adjustment goes far enough. There might be proposals for more radical changes. Some politicians will promise to protect pensions exactly as they are. Others will warn that that's impossible. And somewhere in that debate, the quiet fact remains. The system is adapting, slowly but persistently, trying to navigate between the demands of the present and the uncertainties of the future. For anyone planning their retirement, this is a reminder to think carefully about your pension, but not to panic. The system isn't disappearing, but it's also not guaranteed to provide exactly what you imagined. Building supplementary savings, planning for multiple income streams, and staying flexible about retirement timing all become more important as the traditional pension system carries more uncertainty. This is the new reality, not just in Germany, but across all developed nations. We're living in an era where retirement security requires more active planning and individual responsibility than previous generations expected. The 0.42 euros is part of that transition. It's a number that acknowledges both the commitment to pension promises and the pressures that make those promises harder to keep. And that, fundamentally, is the story. Not just about one number changing in July 2026, but about an entire system in slow motion transformation, trying to survive and adapt in a world that bears less resemblance to the world in which it was born.